Hello everybody, welcome back. This is a Moorhead Media production and we're going to continue our Photoshop tutorial lessons, and today we're going to be taking a look at filters and special effects. So in Photoshop, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the top corner of our screen. We have these filters, the filter tab, and you can't see because I'm on the other screen, but basically we have some options here. Let's just see if we can get those up. Okay, so filter, and when we go to filter, we're given a variety of options. Now there's this thing called the filter gallery, which when it shows up, you can see it has many different options. It's got the artistic, brushstrokes, distort, sketch, stylize, and a lot of these some of these are very strange and some of these are somewhat less strange. So what I did was I'll go through this again. So I basically made a duplicate copy of the art layer, and there's two ways to do that. As we know now, we can drag it down to the plus icon, which just makes a duplicate of our layer, or we can hit Command J and does the exact same thing. So we have a copy of our art. I'm going to hide the layer below it. And now I'm going to go up to Filter, which is right next to the Select tab at the top of the screen. And I'm going to go down to Filter Gallery. And the Filter Gallery is going to bring up this fairly interesting window that's going to give us a whole range of things that we can apply to this image. So we can see this is only being applied to this black part of the drawing. All this other stuff that we've cut out, this is something that we're going to look more into later, but for now we're just going to be working on the black line. And filters work differently depending on what's in the image. So if this was a full color image and it was all flat, if I flatten this down, and there's a couple ways we can do this. There's an option to basically merge all these layers as a new copy of a flattened layer. And the way to do that is we have our layers open, and we're just going to select all the layers that we want to affect. And we're going to hold down Command, and we're going to press Command, Option, Shift, and E. So hold down Command, Option, Shift, and E. And you can see there it created a new layer of our artwork. And if we hide all this, you can see this is the entire thing. So that's really amazing. That's fairly new for me. And if you want to do it on Windows, it's Shift, Control, Alt, Shift, and E. So it's a little different than on a Mac. So now we have our artwork that's all merged. It's a new copy of all the layers I selected. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a filter to this to kind of show you a wide range of what Photoshop can do with filters. Filters are typically used for photography. I mean, there's kind of like a stylization to them that isn't necessarily as useful as, say, with artwork, with digital artwork. It's a little strange. Sometimes it comes out looking really kitschy, but we're just going to look at some of them because there are some cool ones, especially like the distort options are really interesting, and also blur. So we're going to get into a little bit of blurring. All right, but you can see, like, if we bring up this filter gallery, there's all these different options, and you can play around with these. You can just select one and see like a preview. It'll actually generate a preview, and since it's all pretty large, this might take a second or two to generate this preview to actually show you what it's going to look like. And there we go. So this one actually didn't do that much. It seems to actually kind of have brightened it up, which is interesting. But if I select glass, you can see, yeah, that's applying a distortion filter. It's making things look like it's seen through a pane of glass. Diffuse glow, that actually looks kind of cool. It's sort of adding a glow in some of these larger areas of color. It looks really good actually around this blue because it's a sort of a reverse effect. I really like that. But you can see there's all kinds of different versions of things we can do. You can make it look like a charcoal drawing, which doesn't really apply here very well. You can make it look like a pen drawing, etc. So stained glass even. You can see right away when we select a filter, what it's doing is actually applying a range of effects, and it's particularly interesting when you start to mess around with these. So like if I you know, this one particularly is interesting. If you raise the cell size, you can see it's really bumping up and changing the image quite a bit and sort of adding this interesting dynamic. I'll reduce the border thickness, and you can see it's really getting abstract here. The bigger the cell size, the more abstract it gets. So this is really cool if you actually want to just take like one element of your drawing and convert it into a sort of a stylized version of itself and use it as some sort of design aesthetic. But typically we wouldn't want to do this to an entire piece of artwork, and that's because it would basically, it's like you can't really go backwards once you create something and it's like really affected by this filter. You can't really change it. So next thing we're going to look at is the blur, and the blur options are many. We have blur, we have Gaussian blur, lens blur, motion blur, shape blur, and smart blur. There's a lot of others, but these are the ones we're probably going to look at the most. So if we go to blur in the filter, go down, we go to blur, you can see it's basically just did a little, it applied a little tiny blur effect. You can't even tell really that it did anything. But if I continue apply it, if I hit Shift Command F, up Command F, it'll continually apply this. And so there's this option to sort of blur more. And if we zoom in, you can start to see essentially it's trying to blur any areas that, and there it is actually slightly blurring it out. You can see if I undo that, it'll get crisper and cleaner. There we go. Let's go back a few steps. So let's go back to filter. And if we go back to blur, we can choose a thing called Gaussian blur. Gaussian blur is just it applies a blur over the entire image. So it just really, you can see it just like really diffuses all the information and softens it out. This is really good if you want to select a particular area. So like, let's just hit cancel. And let's just say, for example, that I want to blur everything except for the center, radius, and the sun god. So if I make a selection around everything, and now I'm going to do something which I would have liked to mention earlier, which is invert the selection. There's two ways to do this. One is Command Shift I, or you can go up to select in the top menu and you can actually go to invert selection. You can find it there. Inverse. It's called inverse. And so now I want to actually apply that blur effect just to the outer portion of the image. And so now that I have the selection, if I go down to blur, Gaussian blur, we can see it's actually only affecting that part. And so we can really get creative here and use selections to manipulate different parts of our image. I just hit cancel because I didn't want to actually apply that. Another blur effect is motion blur, and this one's really cool because you can actually change the direction of the blur. See, so you have this this little dial allows you to change it, so you can do like a 45-degree angle, you know, and kind of like blur it out. And what this does is it actually creates sort of a sense of motion. This one actually kind of makes you nauseous, but like potentially you can create a sense of motion with the drawing. If something is moving and you want to like really indicate that, you can set an angle, set a direction, and then blur it, and it will look like it's the object is in motion. Okay, cool. So the next option for blur is radial blur. And this one's pretty amazing. This is pretty powerful. There's different features here we can see. Obviously the amount is quite low. We have a spin version, a zoom. So let's just see what happens when we do a zoom. Oh, did I lose my selection? Hold on a sec. I think I did that right. Motion blur. There we go. Oh no, let's try that one more time. So radial blur. It should be applying. I'm not sure why it isn't. So I'm just going to click zoom, and I'm going to use a lower quality and just hit OK. It looks like it doesn't have a preview mode. This one actually just applies directly to the image. Oh yeah, and you can see, like, look how crazy that is, that it zooms in. It zooms the entire blur in as if you're looking through a lens that's moving quickly through space. I'm going to undo that, but that looks pretty darn cool. So you can see a lot of these options they're pretty interesting. There's some different things we can do here. And then we have this thing called a shape blur. And let's see if I can zoom out here. So a shape blur. Let's see. This one, oh, smart blur. This one seems to be taking a long time. I'm going to close that out. Yeah, some of these effects are quite large. These filters actually apply to an entire image to change them. It really does change a lot. So it's best to not crash your computer if possible, but like applying a filter to a really large image could take a very long time if the file size is large. So yeah, that's about it for the blur modes. I mean, there's a lot of other options. There's surface blur. Some of these are more useful than others. We could see, it's just going to show us what this looks like if I change this surface. I'm going to increase the threshold here. It's just applying it sort of equidistant over everything, just like kind of smoothing out over the surface as if it's almost like wet. So there's different things you can do with these effects, and there's some really cool things you can use these for, especially when you're trying to create depth of fields, when you're trying to blur the background, or you're trying to create motion. So that's the blur category. And the next thing I want to show you real quick is here in the distort window, we can do a couple different things. One of them we can do is, I want to show you the pinch and the spherize. Pinch is actually going to sort of pull. You can see it's literally like pulling everything towards the center, kind of in this weird way. It's like dripping in, sort of like the dolly clock situation, where it's all dripping in towards the center. Or you can have it go the opposite way, right? Have it sort of pinch in the other direction. So that's kind of cool. Another distortion feature is called polar coordinates, and this one's really interesting. This actually uses mathematical algorithms to reshape the entire image to either rotate around a circular sort of dial, or it sort of like warps the top and the bottom simultaneously and mirrors it in on itself. So it's a very trippy, very unusual effect. You can see like what it did there. It doesn't usually get that weird, but that's kind of cool. So yeah, you can create interesting patterns with that one with polar coordinates. And then obviously we did pinch before. We have another one called spherize, which is a lot what it sounds. It's literally going to apply a spherical distortion to the outer image. So it's going to like pull things outward as if it were in a sphere, or pull things inward. So it's like concave or convex. So you can see what happens when I hit OK. And this is probably best applied inside the circle, inside here, because it is a sphere. Like if we wanted to make this look three-dimensional. So I'll hit Command-Shift-I on the Mac, go back, and I'm going to go to spherize again. And there we go. We see it applied the most recent version of the filter, and it looks really trippy. It sort of bulged out from the center, and I'm just going to hit undo again. And we can see there's a lot of cool stuff to play with. All right, perfect. So there's different things here. There's stylize, which is sort of more, we looked a little bit at those earlier in the gallery, the filter gallery. There's a few cool ones, like that solarize. It sort of inverts everything, inverted the selection. And there's also pixelate, which pixelate sort of is what we saw earlier when it was creating those distorted cubes. So essentially that's it for the filters, except for one more, which is called Liquify. And Liquify is this very powerful tool, and it's very system intensive. And what it does is it essentially creates a smart mask. You can see everything in the red is deselected and everything inside is selected. Creates a smart mask that I can actually go in, and it will actually allow me to paint and pull and distort parts of the image out, so I can like essentially change anything in the image as if I'm drawing and just pulling different parts of the image around. So it's a really powerful tool. Again, extremely system intensive, but it's pretty darn fun to play with. You can get some really strange things going on here. If you want to get creative, feel free. But so obviously I'm going to cancel that. That's not really what I want to do. And there's not a whole lot of brush options here. I mean, you can change the size and the pressure, but you can't like use different textured brushes and stuff like that with this tool. Obviously you can make it bigger, have less pressure, And this can be useful for different ways. Like you can actually potentially, if something doesn't look right and you drew it and you want to just change it ever so slightly, like let's say you drew a person's hand and it's kind of in an odd position, you could actually liquefy it and just pull it slightly in a separate direction. Now I wouldn't recommend doing it like this, but you can imagine that this tool, it gives you a lot of different things to play around with. Essentially you can really explore with it. And then there's other things like as well. So like right now this is only affecting, it's the reconstruct tool, so it's actually rebuilding the image back to the original, right? And you can have a lot of fun with this. Smooth, this is going to smooth out, smoothing it back to the original state as well. Twirl clockwise, pucker, bloat, push. So this is actually funny because this tool, the Liquify tool, I'm gonna hit cancel, is actually based on a program that was a separate program called Kaiser Goo, and that program was sort of absorbed into Adobe when Adobe decided to buy it because they liked how the potential of the program. So that's it for filters, and I hope you guys enjoyed that tutorial.